What would you do if you were nothing but a maid in a house that answered to Baltimore's most feared family, and you watched the boss's new fiancé turn cruelty into a private hobby the moment he walked out the door? Odette Fanning found out on a gray Tuesday when she pressed a stolen phone to her ear with blood running down her jaw and begged a killer to come home. "Please," she whispered, "she is going to destroy her." She did not know if those words would get her killed. She only knew a 6-year-old girl was suffocating somewhere dark, and nobody else was coming. Then the front doors of the Lombardi house blew inward, and the man she worked for walked through them like a verdict. To survive inside that house, you learned to be a ghost. For Odette, invisibility was a survival skill, and most days a physical impossibility. She was 255 pounds of a woman who took up space in a world that kept asking her to shrink, and she had long since stopped apologizing for it. Her uniform pulled tight across broad shoulders, the apron strings cutting soft grooves into her waist by noon. She was 28, hauling linens up 3 flights of the Lombardi mansion on the quiet money side of the city. But Odette had one advantage nobody had ever handed her on purpose. People like Sloane Harrogate did not see her as a person. They saw furniture that happened to carry trays. We tell a story like this every single day, so subscribe and stay close. Sloane was Ciro Lombardi's new fiancé, a Harrogate by name and by temperament, a waist like a closed fist and eyes the color of harbor ice. She arrived with steamer trunks of silk and a smile that never reached past her teeth. And then there was Ciro. You did not look Ciro Lombardi in the eye unless he told you to. As head of the Lombardi family, his business was territory and silence, and when he walked into a room, the air seemed to go with him. But underneath the parts of him built for violence, one small pulse of ordinary feeling had survived. His 6-year-old daughter, Wren. Wren barely spoke. 2 years earlier, a car bomb meant for her father had taken her mother instead, and the girl had gone quiet in a way that worried every specialist Ciro flew in. She talked in crayon, careful pictures kept in a battered sketchbook, and hid behind the curtains when the house got loud. Odette loved that child with the whole unguarded center of herself. Because Odette was big and soft in every way a scared little girl needed something to be, Wren gravitated to her without being told to, burying her face against Odette's side whenever the world turned sharp. Odette snuck her shortbread from the kitchen and read to her in the pantry, while the family's real business happened behind mahogany doors. Sloane's arrival cracked that fragile peace down the middle. "Watch where you're going, you enormous cow," Sloane hissed one afternoon, colliding with Odette in the hallway and brushing off her blazer, as though Odette's presence had left a stain on it. "I don't understand why Ciro keeps someone of your size on staff. It's aesthetically offensive." "I apologize, Miss Harrogate," Odette murmured, bowing her head, cheeks burning. She wrapped her arms around her own stomach, trying to make herself smaller. Sloane's attention had already moved on, snagging on the doorway where Wren stood holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "And you," Sloane snapped, voice dropping to a whisper meant to terrify. "Stop staring at me with those pathetic eyes. Your father isn't here to coddle you right now." Wren flinched and folded backward into the shadows. Something in Odette's chest twisted hard enough to hurt. She wanted to plant her body between the girl and that woman and never move again. But she was frozen by the oldest fear she owned. If she lost this job, she had nothing behind her. When Ciro was home, Sloane wore a different face entirely, the doting bride-to-be, stroking Wren's hair while her nails pressed just hard enough to leave a mark nobody could see. Ciro, worn thin from running an empire and desperate to give his broken daughter something that looked like a mother, saw exactly what he wanted to see. "Watch over my girls, Odette," he had rumbled 2 days before everything went wrong, settling the collar of an expensive coat in the marble foyer. "I'm trusting you to keep an eye on Wren while I'm gone. Always, Mr. Lombardi," Odette had promised, her voice trembling under the full weight of his attention. She had no idea yet how far that promise would be tested. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ciro was called down to New Orleans for a sit-down with a rival faction, a trip expected to run 48 hours. His most trusted man, Bruno, went with him, leaving the house watched by Junior Muscle, who never set foot past the front door. The instant Ciro's car cleared the driveway, the temperature inside dropped 10 degrees. Sloane sent the housekeeper, the cook, and the other maids home for what she called a quiet weekend, keeping only Odette. "Someone has to scrub the baseboards," Sloane said, sipping a martini at 10 in the morning, looking Odette over like an item on a bill she resented paying. "The labor will do you good." Odette tied on her apron anyway. It wasn't the scrubbing that worried her. It was Wren, alone in that house with a woman whose kindness only ever showed up on camera. By noon, Sloane's true self was fully out in the open. Odette was scrubbing the dining room floor, sweat soaking her collar, when a sharp crack rang out from the next room, followed by a small, terrified whimper. She rushed to the doorway. Sloane stood over Wren holding the girl's sketchbook, the one thing Wren had left of the mother she barely remembered, and with one vicious motion tore it in half, pages scattering across the rug like dead leaves. "I told you to clean up your own mess," Sloane hissed, grabbing Wren's thin arm and squeezing until her knuckles went white. "When I marry your father, you're going to a boarding school in Switzerland and you will never see him again." "No," Wren cried. Something hot broke loose in Odette's chest, burning straight through her usual caution. She stepped into the room, her body filling the doorway. "Miss Harrogate," she said, and her voice shook, but it carried. "Please. She's just a child. I'll clean up the crayons." Sloane rounded on her, and despite being 100 pounds lighter and half a foot shorter, her malice made her feel taller than she was. "Did I ask you to speak?" she snarled, jabbing a sharp nail into Odette's chest. "You're the help. You're nothing. If you ever interrupt me again, I'll tell Ciro you've been stealing from the safe, and you know what this family does to thieves." Odette's breath caught. She looked down at Wren sobbing silently on the rug and understood that if she got thrown out tonight, this little girl would be completely alone with a monster. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll go back to work." "Pathetic," Sloane scoffed. "Wren, go to your room. No dinner tonight, and if I hear one sound out of you, I'll lock you in the cellar." Odette worked the rest of the afternoon with her mind racing. She waited until Sloane carried a bottle of wine upstairs, then slipped into the kitchen and cut apple slices, cheese, and a warm roll onto a plate, hiding it under a napkin. She climbed the back stairs and found Wren curled into a tight ball at the back of her closet, shivering. Odette wedged into that narrow space and pulled the girl into her lap. "Hush now, sweet girl," she murmured. "I brought you something to eat." "She hates me," Wren whispered, taking a small bite of bread. "She says Daddy hates me too. That he wishes I died with Mommy." Odette's blood went cold. "That's a lie," she said fiercely. "Your daddy loves you more than his own life. He just doesn't see her clearly yet." "Are you going to leave me?" Wren asked. "Never," Odette promised, kissing the top of her head. "I'm right here." The door slammed open against the wall. Sloane stood there swaying slightly, wineglass in hand. "I knew it," she slurred. "I said no dinner. Are you deaf, you enormous whale?" Odette rose instinctively, stepping between Sloane and the child. "She was hungry, Miss Harrogate. It's only a little bread." Sloane's hand cracked across Odette's face, the heavy diamond on her finger catching the cheekbone and splitting the skin open. Blood welled instantly. "You don't make the rules in my house," Sloane screamed, grabbing a fistful of Wren's hair and hauling the screaming child out of the closet. "Stop, please," Odette begged, lunging forward, but her weight betrayed her and she went down hard over the rug. "You want to hold her so badly," Sloane said, dragging Wren into the hall. "Let's see how she likes the dark instead." Odette scrambled up and chased them down the corridor. Sloane dragged Wren down the grand staircase, the child crying so hard now she'd started to cough, struggling for air. Wren had severe asthma, brought on by exactly this kind of terror, a detail Sloane either never learned or never cared to remember. "She can't breathe," Odette shouted, thighs burning as she took the stairs 2 at a time. Sloane hauled the girl into the kitchen and yanked open the heavy iron door that led down into the old slate-root cellar, soundproofed, pitch dark, and cold enough to fog your breath in July. "Stay down there and think about how you're going to behave when your father gets home," Sloane said, shoving the girl down the first few steps. Odette threw her body at the door to block it, but Sloane slammed it shut hard enough to catch Odette's fingers in the frame. Odette cried out, wrenching her bruised hand free just as the deadbolt slid home with a sound like a small execution. "There," Sloane said, dusting off her hands. "She stays in there until morning. If you try to unlock that door or call the guards, I'll tell Ciro you attacked me. Look at your face. Who do you think he believes, his future wife or a fat, clumsy maid who can't get down a hallway without breaking a sweat? You're fired. Pack your things and be gone." She walked toward the living room to pour herself another drink, pleased with how her evening had gone. Odette sagged against the cold iron and pressed her ear to the metal. The child had stopped crying. She was wheezing instead, a high, thin whistle Odette recognized instantly and would remember for the rest of her life. Wren's inhaler was upstairs, nowhere near this cellar. Cold panic sliced through Odette's chest. She could not leave. But the only key on the estate lived in Sloane's pocket, and the outside guards had strict orders never to set foot in the house unless called in. Odette caught her own reflection in the steel of the refrigerator, a heavy, frightened woman who had spent her whole life folding herself smaller so the room had space for everyone else. Not tonight, she thought. Not this time. She ran for the one door in that house nobody but Ciro ever touched. His private study. It was locked. She didn't care. She threw her full weight against the solid wood, and the frame groaned, but held. She hit it again, and the lock gave way, and she stumbled into the dark leather room, scrambling for the desk where she'd once seen an emergency phone kept for family business only, the one line that could reach Ciro no matter where he was. Touching it without permission was supposed to cost a person their life. She grabbed it anyway, her bruised fingers shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. It rang once, twice. "Speak," a voice answered, low and impatient, and behind it she could hear New Orleans traffic and men arguing. "Mr. Lombardi," Odette gasped, tears mixing with the blood on her chin. "It's Odette, the maid." Dead silence answered her, the nerve of it enough to get a person killed, and she kept talking anyway. "You have to come back," she said, voice breaking apart. She locked Wren in the cellar. "Wren's having an asthma attack. Sloane won't give me the key. She fired me. She hurt me. I don't care about any of that. Please, you have to come save her." "What did you just say?" The New Orleans noise behind his voice vanished, replaced by something that sounded like a man realizing the one thing he loved most was in the hands of someone who wanted it gone. "Please come home now," Odette begged, sliding down the side of the desk to the floor. "She's going to destroy her, Mr. Lombardi. She's going to destroy her." "Are you with my daughter right now?" Ciro asked, his voice gone eerily calm. "I'm locked out. She's behind the iron door. I couldn't stop her. She's suffocating down there." "Get away from that office," Ciro said, his voice suddenly close and hard. "Go back to the kitchen. Wait by the cellar door." "But you're in New Orleans," Odette said. "Do as I say," he snapped, and the line went dead. She dropped the phone. New Orleans was hours away, and Wren didn't have hours. She didn't have 30 minutes. Odette wiped her bloody face and ran back through the house, past the living room where Sloane sat laughing into her phone, not knowing she'd just lit a fuse. She reached the kitchen and threw herself against the cellar door. "Wren, baby, hold on, I'm here." Silence answered her. No wheezing, nothing at all. "No, no, no," Odette wailed, beating her hands uselessly against the iron. She had turned to go strangle the truth out of Sloane herself when the entire front of the house shook. A crash of splintering wood rolled through the foyer, followed by heavy boots on marble. Sloane's laugh cut off like a wire had been cut, then broke into a scream of pure animal terror. Odette rushed to the kitchen doorway. The front doors had been kicked clean off their hinges, and standing in the wreckage, flanked by 4 armed men, was Ciro Lombardi. He hadn't been in New Orleans at all. The meeting had ended early. He'd been 20 minutes from home the whole time. His eyes found Sloane first, and she went white, dropping her wine glass, red spreading across the marble like something out of a nightmare. He said nothing. He unbuttoned his jacket, dropped it to the floor, and started walking toward her, every step landing like a verdict being read aloud. Bruno moved at his shoulder, a hand resting easy on the gun at his hip. "Ciro, darling, I thought you were in New Orleans," Sloane stammered, all the wine-soaked confidence gone out of her voice. Ciro didn't even look at her. His eyes swept the torn pages of Wren's sketchbook scattered across the rug, then found Odette in the kitchen archway, uniform torn, cheeks split open and bleeding down her collar. Broken as she looked, something in her eyes when they met his made him go still for half a second. "The cellar," Odette said, pointing with a shaking hand. "She doesn't have her inhaler. She stopped making noise, please." Ciro's jaw worked once, hard, and he turned to Sloane and held out his open palm. "The key," he said. "Ciro, you don't understand. She was being disrespectful. This insolent maid attacked me," Sloane said, tears spilling. "The key," he repeated, and when she hesitated 1 second too long, Bruno grabbed her by the collar, slammed her against the wall, and pulled the master ring from her pocket, tossing it through the air. Ciro caught it without looking and moved for the kitchen. "Her inhaler is upstairs in the nightstand," Odette called to Bruno, and he was already taking the stairs 2 at a time. "If your heart is pounding for her right now, subscribe and keep going with us." Ciro shoved the key into the deadbolt, ripped the iron door open so hard it slammed against the brick, and plunged down into the black, freezing stairwell with Odette right behind him, flicking the light switch as she went. At the bottom, curled into a small, motionless shape on the cold slate floor, was Wren. Her lips had gone a faint, terrible blue, her small chest still. "Wren," Ciro roared, and he dropped to his knees on the icy stone, gathering her into arms that could crush a man and cradling her instead like she was made of glass. "Breathe for Papa," he begged. "Breathe, Principessa." Odette lowered herself down beside them despite the pain screaming up her knees and pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck. "There's a pulse," she said. Her own voice dropped into something low and steady she didn't know she had. "It's weak, but it's there. Lay her flat. Tip her head back. We need her airway open." Ciro did exactly as she said without a single question. "Come on, sweet girl," Odette coaxed, chafing Wren's small, cold hands between her own. Bruno slid to a stop holding the plastic inhaler. Odette snatched it from him. "Hold her jaw open," she told Ciro, and she pressed the inhaler past Wren's lips and pumped it twice, leaning her weight forward to push the medicine deep into small lungs that had almost given up. 3 seconds passed with nothing. Then Wren's chest hitched. A raw wheeze tore up through her throat into a violent fit of coughing, and her eyes flew open wide and terrified. "Daddy," she rasped. "I'm here, baby," Ciro murmured, crushing her against his chest, his broad shoulders shaking once, hard. Wren turned her head and found Odette with wet, searching eyes and reached out a small, trembling hand. Odette kissed her forehead, her own tears cutting clean lines through the blood on her cheek. "I'm right here, my sweet girl. You're safe now." Ciro stood, lifting his daughter like she weighed nothing, then looked down at Odette struggling up off the cold floor and did something no one in that house had ever done for her. He held out his hand. She set her bruised fingers into his palm and he pulled her up with an ease that startled her. "Bruno," he said, his voice already sliding back into its usual cold register as they climbed the stairs. "Yes, boss," Bruno answered. "Take her to the cold storage lot out in Dundalk," Ciro said, not even glancing back at the woman screaming behind them in the hall. "Tie her to a chair in the freezer unit. Let her learn what cold actually feels like. I'll handle her myself once my daughter is asleep." "No, Ciro, please. I'm a Harrogate." Sloane's voice rang out, followed by a scuffle, a sharp slap, and the heavy thud of the front doors closing behind her. The quiet that followed was the sound of a house that had just been purged of its poison. 2 hours later, the estate had gone almost unrecognizable in its calm. A private family doctor had come and gone, examined Wren, given her a proper breathing treatment and a mild sedative to see her through the worst of the shock. Ciro sat by her bed the whole time, his face unreadable stone. Odette retreated to her small room off the kitchen, washed the dried blood from her face, changed into an old gray sweatshirt, taped her bruised fingers, and pressed a butterfly bandage over the cut on her cheek. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at the wall while the adrenaline drained out of her, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion and a slow-crawling dread. She'd broken down the boss's private door. She'd used the family's emergency line. Either one alone was supposed to be worth a bullet in a house like this, and on top of it, she'd failed to keep his fiancée from very nearly killing his only child. She was certain she was about to be let go, or worse, quietly made to disappear. A soft knock startled her out of it. "Miss Fanning," one of the guards said through the door. "Mr. Lombardi wants you in his study." Odette closed her eyes, took one long breath, and stood. "At least Wren is safe," she told herself. "That has to be worth something." She walked the quiet halls and stopped dead at the study door, shattered clean off its hinges, splinters of expensive wood scattered over the Persian rug. She flushed hot, only now understanding what kind of force it had taken her own body to do that kind of damage. She stepped over the wreckage and went in. Ciro sat behind the desk, one lamp throwing long shadows across his face. He'd shed the jacket and tie, sleeves rolled up over forearms covered in old ink, and 2 glasses sat on the desk beside a bottle of something old and expensive. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Odette twisted the hem of her sweatshirt in both hands. "Mr. Lombardi, I want to apologize for the door. I had no right to break into your study, and I never should have touched that phone. If you want me gone, I understand. I only ask that you find someone kind to look after Wren." "Sit down, Odette," he said again, no room left in his voice for an argument. She lowered herself into the expensive chair, painfully aware of how her hips filled it. Ciro poured 2 fingers of bourbon into each glass and slid one across the desk. "Do you know what that door was made of?" he asked. "Oak, sir," she said. "Solid 2-inch reinforced oak," he corrected, something dark and almost amused behind his eyes. "My own men use a battering ram to get through doors like that. You went through it with your shoulder." She looked down at her lap, cheeks burning. "I suppose it's the one time being this size finally came in handy," she said, the joke aimed at herself before anyone else could get there first. Ciro set his glass down hard enough to make her flinch. "Do not talk about yourself that way in front of me," he said, voice dropping low and dangerous. "The woman who broke through that door, who stood up to a Harrogate, who held my dying daughter in the dark while she was bleeding, that woman is not a punchline. Do you understand me?" Odette looked up at him, stunned. No one had ever told her to respect herself before, let alone ordered it. "Yes, sir," she managed. "Drink your bourbon," he said. She lifted the glass with taped fingers, and it burned pleasantly on the way down. Sloane Harrogate was never just a socialite, Ciro said, leaning back. Her father controls half the shipping trade moving through this coast. Marrying her was supposed to secure a supply line, nothing more. What I didn't know, and his voice went to ice here, was that she'd already cut her own deal with the Calvani family, the people who've wanted my territory for 3 years. Her real plan was never marriage. It was to slowly break my daughter, weaken my line, and push me out from the inside. What happened tonight wasn't an accident. It was a test run to see how long a locked door would take to kill her. Odette's hand flew to her mouth. "If you hadn't made that call," Ciro said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers, "I'd have come home tomorrow to a dead child and a grieving fiancé playing the part of her life." He rounded the desk and stopped in front of her, and though he was enormous and dangerous in every possible way, she realized she wasn't afraid of him at all. He brushed the edge of the bandage on her cheek, his rough hand shockingly gentle. "You bled for what's mine," he murmured. "In my world, that kind of loyalty is rarer than anything money can buy." "I only love her, Mr. Lombardi," she whispered. "She's a good girl." "I know you do," he said, his gaze never leaving her face, "which is why, starting tonight, you're no longer a maid in this house." Her heart dropped straight through the floor. "He's letting me go gently," she thought. "Mr. Lombardi, please. I understand if you'll be Wren's official guardian, and you'll run this household," he said, cutting her off. "Final. Your pay will match a lieutenant's. You'll have a suite on the second floor next to hers, and you will never scrub another floor in this house again as long as you live." She sat in stunned silence, one tear tracing a path through the dirt still on her neck. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," he told her, quiet and sure. "Yes," she breathed. He nodded once, a cold, satisfied smile finally reaching his mouth. "Good. Now go move your things upstairs. I have a rat to freeze." The Dundalk cold storage lot sat low and dark along the water, a warehouse full of frozen slabs hanging on iron hooks. Inside the deep freeze, tied to a metal chair, sat Sloane Harrogate, blazer streaked with grime, platinum hair frozen stiff, teeth chattering. The steel door groaned open, spilling a rectangle of dim yellow light across the frost as Ciro stepped inside, coat unbuttoned against a cold he didn't seem to feel. Bruno stood just outside with a rifle resting easy across his chest. "Ciro, please," Sloane sobbed. "I'll give you anything. My father will give you the ports." Ciro circled her chair slowly, boots crunching over frost. "Your father is already renegotiating his terms with my people," he said. "The second I told him his daughter cut a side deal with the Calvani family to stage a coup from inside my own house, he couldn't cut you loose fast enough to save his own business." "No, the Calvanis forced me. I swear it," Sloane said, her face gone past pale. "Do not lie to me," he said, leaning down until his eyes were level with hers. "You hated my daughter because she's the only heir this family has. You thought if she quietly disappeared, you could bend me however you wanted." He touched one frozen tear on her cheek. "You underestimated me," he said softly. "But you underestimated Odette a great deal more. That woman carries more spine in her bruised fingers than your whole bloodline has ever produced." "What are you going to do to me?" Sloane choked out. "I'm a businessman," Ciro said. "The Calvanis are planning to hit my eastern line tonight, expecting you to have the cameras down. You're going to call them and tell them the grid is dark, and when they walk into that trap, they won't walk back out of it." Then he left her there, weeping in the cold. Back at the house, a different kind of change was already taking root. Odette stood in the middle of the second-floor suite, a room bigger than the apartment she grew up in, a king bed heaped in down comforters, a marble fireplace crackling in the corner. She'd just showered off the smell of the cellar and the dried blood, and found hanging in the closet a set of deep burgundy silk pajamas in her exact size, a detail that made her chest go tight. Ciro hadn't just given her a room, he'd ordered it filled with clothes cut to fit the body she actually had. For the first time in her life, nothing pinched, nothing pulled, nothing reminded her every hour that she was too much of something. She caught her reflection in the full-length mirror, same broad shoulders, same soft stomach, Same jagged bandage on her cheek, but something behind her eyes had changed for good. A knock came from the connecting door. Wren stood there in her nightgown clutching the stuffed rabbit. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. "Come here, sweet girl," Odette said, opening her arms, and Wren ran straight into them, burying her face against Odette's warm middle. Odette carried her to the enormous bed and pulled the covers over them both, and within minutes, the slow rhythm of her own breathing pulled the child down into real sleep. It was 4 a.m. when the door clicked open again. Ciro stood in the frame, exhausted, his shirt marked with soot and something that looked like dried blood. He crossed to the edge of the bed and looked down at the two of them, and the ruthless boss who'd walked out hours earlier was nowhere in that look at all. "The Calvanus," Odette whispered, careful not to wake the girl. "Handled," he said, and sat on the edge of the mattress, the bed dipping under him. "Sloane's betrayal has been dealt with. The house is secure." He looked at her then, his eyes tracing the silk over her shoulder, and it wasn't the cold, appraising look Sloane always aimed at her. It was something closer to reverence. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people starved for something," he said quietly. "Starved for power, for money, for some perfect shape they think will finally make them enough. They're all sharp edges." He traced the curve of her hip through the blanket, and her breath caught, heat rushing through her all at once. "You," he murmured, "are warm. You take up space, Odette, and you've earned every inch of it. Do not shrink yourself in this house again." A tear slid down her uninjured cheek. "Mr. Lombardi," she started. "Ciro," he corrected. "To the rest of the world, I am Don Lombardi. To you, I am only ever Ciro." He pressed a slow kiss to her forehead, just above the bandage, and stood. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow you take your place." The 6 months that followed remade the Lombardi house from the ground up. Sloane Harrogate disappeared quietly from Baltimore society, officially relocated to an extended stay somewhere in Europe, while her father's shipping business was folded piece by piece into Ciro's holdings. The Calvani family, gutted by an ambush that should have gone their way and didn't, limped into a humiliating truce that would hold for years. But the real shock, the one people still talked about at dinner parties up and down the coast, was the woman standing at Ciro Lombardi's side. Odette ran that household with a fierce, unshowy competence nobody had thought to expect from her. Staff who once talked over her now waited for her word. Wren, most importantly, thrived. The attacks stopped. The silent, flinching child became a loud, laughing one, always somewhere near Odette's elbow, covered half the time in flour from the kitchen and half in mud from the garden. And between Ciro and Odette, whatever had been simmering quietly under the surface caught and became something neither of them tried very hard to hide. He courted her with things that meant more than money, custom gowns in deep emerald and sapphire cut to the curves nothing had ever flattered before, and he looked at her, always, like a man who had finally stopped starving. The real test came on a cold December night at the family's annual gathering, a room full of the coast's most dangerous names under one roof. Word had gotten around for months about Ciro's new woman, and more than a few of the other families had come expecting to laugh at some overworked servant playing dress-up. When the ballroom doors opened, 400 guests went dead silent. Ciro walked in radiating his usual quiet menace, but every eye in the room found the woman on his arm. Odette looked like something out of a painting, off the shoulder black velvet skimming her generous curves, the Lombardi diamonds resting against her collarbone, the faint white line on her cheek somehow only adding to the effect. She did not hide her size. She wore it like armor. A rival boss, Don Petrosian, sauntered over with his skeletal wife trailing behind. "Ciro," he smirked, looking Odette up and down. "I heard you brought the kitchen help to the head table." The room went taut. Hands drifted toward hidden weapons. Ciro didn't need to answer for her because Odette simply smiled, calm enough to disarm the whole room in one breath. "We did make some changes, Don Petrosian," she said, her voice smooth and carrying. "We found the last management lacking in loyalty and, frankly, survival instinct. I'd mind your own house before you find your own foundation giving out under all that arrogance." The color drained out of his face. He bowed his head, muttered something, and retreated. Ciro looked down at her, pride shining plain on his face, and pulled her against his side. "Have I told you how stunning you look tonight, Regina Mia?" he murmured against her ear, right in front of every dangerous man in the room. "You might have mentioned it once or twice," she said, smiling, and across the room Wren waved down at her from the balcony, safe under watchful eyes. Odette Fanning had started out as a ghost, an invisible, overweight maid meant only to scrub floors and swallow whatever cruelty came her way. She had thrown her whole body against a locked door, picked up a phone she was never supposed to touch, and ordered a dangerous man home to save a child nobody else would fight for. She had saved a little girl's life, brought down a coup, and claimed a place at the head of the table that nobody in that room would ever question again. New stories land here every day, so subscribe and let the next one find you.